Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to just first of all just say that there's some confusion about the start time. It was originally 2:15, and then it went to 2:30, and now we heard it's 2:45. So, but we're going to start now anyway because you're here. Some people will join us, I think, as we go along. And one of our panelists is actually going to join us online, so I'm hoping very much that the technology will work and so on. But I'd like to just begin by saying that this is really a kind of follow-up meeting to a meeting that was held in Pretoria, in South Africa, about on the 4th of December. And that meeting, which was very interesting, very full of ideas and so on, brought together a number of people from across the continent to talk about science and development and so on. And one of the proposals that came out of that meeting was, in fact, the creation of a science, technology, and innovation leadership forum. That name, of course, is completely pliable at the moment. But that was an idea that emerged. And so the one thought we had was that it might be really useful to use this opportunity to try and understand whether that that idea is a good idea, first of all. Secondly, if it is a good idea, what would such a forum actually do? It's senseless sort of creating yet another forum. And of course, one of the big challenges is what's happened to leadership forums in the past, why didn't they succeed and so on. So that was sort of the basic idea of this panel, and I'm very pleased that you've been able to join us here today, and I hope that we'll get some discussion. So just to say that my name is Ahmed Bawa. I'm from South Africa, and I work at the University of Johannesburg, and I'm a physicist, a theoretical physicist, but I have a strong interest in the role of science in development and so on. Joining us today is Farai Kapfudzawaru, who's sitting over there. His name is a tongue twister for me, at least. And he's at Future Africa, which is an institute at the University of Pretoria. And he works in the area of science policy and so on, and is the point person at Future Africa on research and partnerships. Then we have Lisa Kosten, who's president of the African Academy of Sciences, and she's also an expert on food security, a professor of food security. Also used to be at the University of Pretoria. I don't know if she's still associated with it. Yeah. Then we go on to Sameh Soro. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. This is an indication of the diversity of Africa, right? So, and he's the INGSA Africa Steering Committee member, and he's the Dean of the Faculty of Pharmacy at Helwan University in Egypt, which I've been told is in Cairo. Okay. And then we have Shomora Mikeka, who's the Director of Science, Technology, and Innovation of the government of Malawi, and we are new friends. We just recently met each other. And then, hopefully online, we'll be joined by Sarutsai Muyambo, who's the National Chair for the Organization for Women in Science for the Developing World. And she's based in Zimbabwe, and she is head of the Zimbabwe chapter of that organization. So we hope very much that she'll join us. Okay, so what we're going to do today is really ask Farai to kind of really just give us sort of headline outcomes, if you like, of that discussion that took place last year, that meeting that took place last year on the 4th of December, and to provide us with some sort of context, if you like. And then I'm going to ask each of our panelists to spend 5 minutes or so just responding to what Farai says, and then we'll go into some kind of discussion after that. But let me just kick off by asking Farai to start.
Thank you, Ahmed. Good afternoon, colleagues. So I will I would like to, as part of the context and background for this discussion, probably go back a little bit further to the December convening that Ahmed mentioned, to just firstly highlight, I think, the collaboration that Future Africa and the International Science Council have, which actually led to these kind of discussions about possibly having or launching a STI Leadership Forum. And it dates back to the International Science Council used to have a regional office in Africa, in South Africa, which was a coordinating body for the council, but it closed in 2021. And when I think a few months later, before the closing, there was an open call for the hosting of regional offices across the globe for International Science Council regional offices. Whilst they had applications of interest from Latin America, from Europe, as well as the Asia Pacific, there wasn't any interest which came from the continent, and it raised a lot of questions for the International Science Council as to what was the reasoning behind the absence of interest from the African continent. So, and this relates to many of us who have been engaged on the continent in this area would probably know some of the resource challenges that come with coordinating some of these initiatives, but also the fact that for those who have read the INGSA2024 review, some of the fragmentation that is currently within the STI ecosystem, so probably there wasn't any interest in coordinating that kind of initiative, considering the complexity around this coordination process. But also it raised a lot of questions also around the issue of the role of African science in the global science arena, because it seems to indicate that Africa didn't have a very strong voice on the global platforms, or they had significant limitations. But also it raised a lot of other questions related to, what is the role of science in policymaking and what is the impact of science in terms of in society. So this led to collaboration between the Future Africa and the International Science Council. So instead of us hosting, just agreeing to host a regional office for the International Science Council, we thought it might be valuable, instead of just hosting the office, but to actually do some engagement and coordinate and convene a group of Pan-African platform, which allows a lot of the STI stakeholders on the continent to actually explore what is the value proposition of African science in the global arena, but also beyond that, also for the interest of the ISC, to also investigate and understand and explore what is the institutional presence of the International Science Council on the continent. So as a result of those conversations, we've done a lot of stakeholder mapping exercises. This included the convening that we held on the sidelines of this Science Council, South African Science Forum, where we brought in a multitude of stakeholders from the science ecosystem on the continent to just try to explore some of these two issues around the value proposition of African science in the global arena, as well as the institutional presence of the International Science Council. So that's where this idea of possibly initiating a STI Leaders Forum, not necessarily as a new organization or as a new forum, because as many of you know, there are so many of these platforms. The UNECA is already coordinating such initiatives. Just recently, 2 weeks ago, with the STI Forum on the continent, but also there are also a lot of initiatives being coordinated by the African Union, for example, the EU, the AU-EU STI agenda. So what we realize from these conversations with a lot of stakeholders, obviously, firstly, the issue of fragmentation within the science ecosystem. So what we intended to do as a proposal, or as an exploratory idea, is the possibility of us convening a forum, not necessarily an organization, which allows a lot of these, with these platforms, we leverage and the competencies and expertise that are across the board, including the private sector, because the private sector on the continent, particularly in terms of R&D, has not been contributing significantly. So we thought that could be the platform of STI Forum could be valuable in doing that. So not necessarily to initiate a new organization, but just to leverage on the existing platforms that are on the continent. So this could involve a lot of stakeholders. So why, as I indicated, so possibly just to go through some of the issues that we discussed, some of the reasoning was that the Leadership Forum could determine and advocate for Africa's agenda based on African needs and African interests. It could play an important role in unleashing the transformative potential of African science, and as I mentioned, it could help in reducing duplicity, fragmentation, and the competition for resources on the continent. So it could, that's probably the purpose of this conversation, is to explore if there's such a need for a forum like that, what kind of role would it play, what kind of activities would it entail. So in a nutshell, that's more or less the engagement that we have had. So the purpose of this forum is just to engage with you whether there's a need for such a forum, what are some of the challenges that could be, incurred in trying to explore and initiate something like that. So for now, I'll leave it to Ahmed and the panelists to engage on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and you should feel free to also come in whenever that's necessary. So I think the important point is that meeting in December was, it was a really vigorous and exciting discussion, I thought, and the idea of this forum emerged there. But I think there's a need to problematize the idea that we shouldn't just leap into another forum, if you like, that we should have a clear idea of whether it's needed, and if it's needed, whether, what would its purpose be, and so on. So we're going to go in this order, and I'm going to ask Lisa now to please come in for 5 minutes each, and then we'll open it up for some discussion. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much. I look at this, the forum and the need for a leadership forum, and I'm thinking of a puzzle. Now, as a child, when you start building puzzles, they usually give you big pieces, only a few pieces, and it's usually a square puzzle, and then you have to vision and see the picture and start building it. And of course, later on in life, you get to 1,000-piece puzzles. But I see Africa, and I see this proposal as a big African puzzle that we're jointly building. Now, usually when you build a puzzle, some start in the middle with the picture, and some people start with the corners, and then do the sidelines, and then you fill in the picture. So the trick is to have the vision, the picture, where you want to go, how you want to build this puzzle. So we know the African continent is big, and I often say to people in other parts of the world, we can actually fit the whole of Europe and China and America into Africa. And we need to tell our story, and we need to have a voice, but a joint voice. And we need to speak with informed and coherent supporters of the vision going forward for the continent. And that's perhaps the tricky part of building this puzzle for the future, for the African continent. And I always see it as a collective, because it is about people. And I want to add a very important word: peace, prosperity, and of course a healthy planet, particularly a healthy African continent. So how do we bring these pieces of the puzzle together and identify the glue that's going to keep us together, and push and develop that transformational agenda that's so important to take Africa into the future, to be the leader we should be. And I know that the mapping exercise that's already been done is essential. Identifying the different roles of the different players in this puzzle is essential. And getting a space for us to express our view and our opinion is very important. I've just returned from the World Economic Forum, and there's a forum, it's more than 10 years old, and it's highly successful. It's a place where great minds meet, where things are planned and the future is envisaged. And I was quite impressed with what happened, but what I did miss was the voice of Africa at that platform, and very importantly, the science voice. And I think that's where these forums can start linking. So I think it's a very important, essential next step for us to achieve.
Okay, I start where Lise just stopped. The continent is really very large. We have 56 different countries. Each one has its own challenges and aims, goals. Yet, we're still facing same problems. We go to different organizations, different international fora, and each one has his own agenda, defending this agenda alone. If we manage to have a platform that gather the African voice, unify this voice to defend what we need, what we will help our people, what will let us achieve the vision we see for the continent, I think this will be much more stronger and more impactful. The idea, how can we face the challenges to build such leadership forum? How can we don't need really to unify the goals between the different partners, but we need to have a common vision. Through this vision, we can all achieve our goals. If we can solve this equation, I think such leadership forum can be a success.
Thank you, moderator, and my colleagues, Farai, for the opportunity. During my high school times, I used to be one of the best students in history, both world history and also Central African history. Of course, I graduated with an engineering degree and pursued that. And currently, I'm the Director of Science, Technology, and Innovation in the Republic of Malawi. And however, that said, I still get moved and persuaded to always recall, but also to reimagine the history makers. And we could be also seated here, history makers. Woodrow Wilson, 1918, on 8th January, I was born on 6th January. Convinced, the whole world, first and foremost, his own Congress in the US, with his 14 points. And his first point was on open covenants, openly arrived at. And his last, the 14th point was on that there should be a general association be formed immediately there, and then when he had made the proclamations of his 14 points. And this gathering in here, AD 12, in the prestigious Kigali Convention Center, gives us a premise for a possibility of open covenant, openly arrived at, having been briefed where we're coming from, but also today where we can answer the question whether or not it is necessary to come up with, an African, science, technology, and innovation, leaders forum. I think that's the question, to be or not to be. And I wanted also to, that we be reminded that this particular month of May is not an ordinary month in Africa, because you argued that sometimes there have not been a voice or presence sitting on the table from the African voice. I wanted us to be reminded of May 24, 1963, where His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ghana, at that point in time stood up in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. And I'm happy always to see his face in there. And when I meet some of the Africans from Ghana, either called Kwame or called Nana, I'm reminded of May 1963. Kwame Nkrumah in there said in his speech, which I love, camels and donkeys and no more. Now, I have seen and read this many times, and I see that we are still back in those days, and we have not achieved anything closer to what he proclaimed as his desire in terms of lifting Africa through science and technology. At that time, there was no innovation, and therefore, I have annotated his speech in brief. Now, I think I'll share those annotations in here, and which moves. And I have, instead of 14 points, I have 7 points only to propose why we may want to, propose favorably for the African Science, Technology, and Innovation Leaders in a forum. But that said, I would like to say that in Kwame Nkrumah's own words, when he had considered the situation of Africa, it befits to be read and annotated today because of the theme that we have chosen, transformation imperative. From the field where I study engineering, the word transformation is very useful because it will cause change of direction, change of smell, color, shape, and everything else. And there is no transformation if things appear the same way they have appeared. That's not transformation. In geometry, transformation will flip the figures and the shapes that we've seen in there. So for that purpose, Kwame Nkrumah declared that it is within the possibility of science and technology, and I would like to add innovation by annotating that, to make even the Sahara, and I would like to add that all Africa, the 55 member states, bloom into a vast field with verdant, vegetation, agriculture, and all other opportunities, tourism, mining, and what we may want to say. Now, I also wanted to highlight that through data, evidence, and related aspects, including provision of internet, as the giant traffic for communications and all that we want to have, we should be able to see transformation in education or human capital, reimagining the education, understanding that even the labor market is reimagining itself, and therefore we need to retool, upskill, but also reskill everyone else, making sure that we accelerate the achievement of SDG number 4, leaving exactly no one behind. I am reminded of the need that through science, technology, and innovation, if they be the tools, we can recall the keynote speaker this morning to say that our economies would not be grown from the so-called budget policy or budget injections, capitalizing, but also providing a labor support to that. They would be grown by at least 66% and more through a knowledge basis, tech-driven, but also innovation-led. And this is a mantra within the Science, Technology, and Innovation strategy for Africa. I wanted to highlight that it is with our naked eyes that we are seeing giant, in Africa, robotic machines that construct smart, intelligent roads, digging multi-purpose dams for fishing, water supply, and irrigation. And we are seeing laying of airstrips for drones, big drones, not the small ones, to do support in most of the service sectors. And therefore, there is no surprise that this international network on scientific advice to governments, is arguing on the need for African STI leaders across all these essences. And for that reason, I have 7 propositions, but I think I can say them now or I can say them later, depends on what the moderators think. Okay, so the first one. I think, with respect to influencing key developments in STI in the African continent, I am proposing that we have champions, as a functional national observatory at national level, compared to what is not really a function of the African observatory for science, technology, and innovation. If that is delocalized and degenerated at national level, and that they are champions to do these kind of things, guided by their national science, technology, and innovation policies, and legislative frameworks, we should be able to achieve something. So that's number one, champions guided by their national STI policies. Number two, on the strategic information and exchange of the same, I am proposing a digital platform and a cloud service for Africa with stratified portals and dashboard where entries of governments, academia, industry, civil society, environmentalists, as STI champions could be fixed in there. So this would be the quintuple helix framework beyond the triple helix framework. So we would have all these ones plunked into there, and then we have a digital platform at member state level and the continental level. Number three, raising awareness and advocacy for African science. There are challenges. My study has demonstrated that in the African context, the 55 member states, not all of them have a national STI policy in place. And some it's because it's on the way, and some it's because there are challenges in the formulations, adoption, and implementation of the same. So this is an area where we would want to consider building equitable partnerships to deliver on that each and every member state have a current STI policy. Number four, provide leadership on the development of a Pan-African initiative. So research, policy, infrastructure, strategies for STI infrastructure development must be laid clear and sharing in-country and across Africa resources in terms of STI infrastructure in all fields, including nuclear reactors for specific simulations and experimentations. Number five, support the positioning of African science and amplify position of African continent and amplify its presence in global positioning and voice. Here I am proposing that Africa continent should set its agenda high. At the G77 we met last year in Cuba, Havana, plus China, 135 member states, and we agreed that 16th September, that was just a week before United Nations General Assembly in New York, that 16th September of every year for South to South, that shall be declared, has been declared actually by the declaration made in there, to be a day for STI in South to South. And in there we'll be looking at the economic gains possible from STI exploitation to that effect. And similarly at the UN General Assembly, beyond having side meetings where only ministers could be invited or specific leaders, we would want to have a place in the chamber articulating aspects of STI in the African context, but at the United Nations General Assembly. Number six, as I'm concluding, representing in the international scientific organizations. This, I think, has been highlighted, and I don't want to overemphasize on that, but we need to see that there's inclusion in all the important global continental fora, that we have a voice from the champions or from the STI leaders in the African continent. Lastly, strategic political engagement with donors. We have heard since morning, and this is a story told many times, of resources, technical and financial support, but this can only happen if we have our leaders, properly positioned, appointed and elected, sitting on the same table to negotiate with the donor and development communities, international cooperating partners, and the banks. And the banks I'm referring to, the World Bank, African Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, and several others. With these, I think that we should begin to be able to reap even the articulations and the proclamations which Kwame Nkrumah made on 24th May 1963, but also remembering the movement and the cause effects of President Woodrow Wilson that he made in 1918, that we should be deliberate sometimes to come up with associations which could bring about the transformation that we so much desire. Thank you, moderator. I wanted to cut it short that way. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I just want to begin by asking each of the panelists whether you'd like to respond to that, and whether there are any additional thoughts that you'd like to put on the table before we open it up. And Farai, please feel free also to come in. But let me begin with Lisa.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that extensive overview and proposal of the steps going forward. I think it's important that we make sure that we leave no one behind in a forum like that. Like in the past, sometimes we have smaller interest groups. And I'm going to use one example since I'm a food security space. There's always a debate around what's the most important to ensure food distribution or access or availability, affordability. And then I always say, well, let's first start by producing the food. And we often in science find these conflicts. Who's the most important? Currently, the debate around soil sciences is extremely important. But I see this as an opportunity to include, like the youth science forums, to include the voice of female scientists and to promote it. And to ensure that when we are at these global platforms, that Africa's never forgotten and that we have a prominent space in the world agenda.
Thank you for this extensive proposal and these 7 ideas. And one of them is really very, very crucial, the strategic engagement of political parties, because we know the nature of the continent. Usually, if you don't have a decision which comes top down, it's difficult to succeed. And if we don't have really engagement from policymakers from early on and good participation in such leadership forum, I think it will be difficult really to achieve success. One thing I would like also to add, the communication between different African countries on the continent. We are very diverse. The STI level on the continent is very diverse. We have people just starting, we have countries which have very well-defined STI roadmaps and white papers and doing very well. So such forum could be a good platform for communication, to understand each other and to define the position and define a map for the STI on the continent and start to build upon this map to know where are the gaps, how to fill these gaps, to produce a good roadmap that can help everyone. And this way, I think, will not leave anyone behind. Thank you.
Yeah. So I just probably want to, also re-emphasize some of the points raised by Samir and Lisa, particularly because in relation to one of the projects that we are doing at Future Africa around investment in science on the continent. And what's often is that is an implication on how Africa has an influence on agenda setting at the global stage. So I think, there's been so much noise which has been made about how African national government are not committing the agreed, 1% to GDP in terms of research and development. I think that's also an important factor which we have to consider, in addition to the fact that even within the continent, the business research investment in science is also decreasing. So that's something which is very important if we're going to flip the idea of the African continent having an agenda, having an influence in setting the agenda at the global stage. But also just to build also on Samir's point on the diversity, I think it's very obvious, I think, if we have to be cognizant of the complexity of the African continent, be it language, cultures, but also the different knowledge systems that are on the continent, which should be integrated when it comes to science policy and in building such an initiative, because in many cases that's often not integrated into consideration when these kind of platforms are considered. But also another last point, which I think I've been discussing at length with Ahmed, I think there's so much increased focus on the supply side when it comes to building STI capacity on the continent. There's so much focus on publication outputs, production of graduate, PhD graduates, which is very important. But I think there's less consideration of, of the absorption capacity of industry and society, of the knowledge and the capacity that is being developed within the science ecosystem, because that's part and parcel of the, of how we transform the science ecosystem and build this platform that we are trying to envision.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just 2 points from me. The one is just to amplify Farai's last point, this idea around coming to grips with the supply and demand side for science. Our focus, even this morning, when we listened to those talks, the discussion is almost totally about the supply side. It's about, there's, of course, there's a particular context to this meeting, which is, the fact that we need to understand how to bring science to bear on policy making and so on. The question really, for me at least, is how do we increase the demand side of science on our continent? We constantly complain about the lack of money, right? Well, there won't be money if the demand side is not there. So it seems to me at least that that's something that we should really keep in mind. And the second is, and it's linked to the first one, it's the nature of science on our continent. Is the science we are doing and that we are aspiring to do, is it the science that our continent needs? I know that sounds a bit instrumentalist, but I keep reminding myself, that the roots of MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the roots were really the training of technicians for the railroad industry. They were responding to a real challenge, if you like, in its initial stages. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should do that, but I think it is an important question for us, I think, to ask whether, our aspirations in science are the aspirations of the majority of Africans about their needs in terms of science. So just putting that out there. Okay, I'm going to now open it up and just see if there are any questions or comments. Please feel free to comment. Let's try and keep it a bit tight because I don't want for us to run over time. But I see a hand up there. And I'm just waiting to see another one there. Sure. Let's take 3, and then we'll get some feedback from the... You can use this one, I guess. We've got 2 here. Okay. There's one over here on the left-hand side. Yes. On my left-hand side, sorry.
So my name is João Barros. I'm a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, Africa, here in Kigali, Rwanda. I wanted to comment on the last statement that you just made regarding the potentially instrumentalist aspect of scientific choices. And having been born and raised in Portugal, that actually went from 0.5 PhDs per 1,000 members of the population to 8 PhDs per 1,000 during my lifetime. What I felt is the biggest good that came out of investing in science and scientific research is the scientific culture, that we have more and more members of the population that know the scientific method, want to make data-driven, science-based decisions. It's not generalized, but it's really important. So when we make these decisions, I think it's super important to keep that in mind, the scientific culture of the entire population.
There's another hand up there, just behind you. Yeah.
My question is, my name is Prince Osei, I'm from AIMS. How do you convince African governments to invest in science? Because you cannot drive the science you don't invest in. If we continue to do research, those who are funding the research will drive the direction of the research most of the time. So you made a comment about the percentage of GDP that we put into research in Africa. So I want to hear your thoughts on how we can convince our African governments to invest in science.
Then on this side, please.
So, hi everyone, my name is Victoria Kondi. I'm also from AIMS here in Rwanda. So I just wanted to add to what, I was having the same question as Prince. I was to know, actually I'm a young area career researcher, and someone in the team mentioned that at some point we have to also start thinking how, to give the floor to the youngest, also to start also learning from your elders. So how are we making sure that the youngest get the capacity that is really needed, to be able to carry out the research that we want in Africa? This is my first question.
We can hear you.
Okay, and then the second one, as Prince mentioned, so how are we bringing, aside of our government to found, how are we bringing the industry? Because someone mentioned that in Africa we do, our research really reflects what we want in Africa. And I mean, at some point, if we bring in, I don't know how are we, this is a question I'm asking, how are we bringing up the industry in the research environment? I think at some point, if we try at some point to get how we are bringing them, it will also help to understand the kind of research that we really need to do in Africa. So I will just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back for another round shortly, but let me ask, let's begin with Farag, and then we'll come this way. Thanks.
I think I can answer one or two questions. I think, which is interrelated to the first question, how do we convince African governments to invest in science? I think it relates to the first point about, the scientific culture in the society. As you can imagine, for example, during the COVID pandemic, there was so much interest in the value of science in addressing, in responding to the pandemic. I think if you get society more involved in understanding and valuing the role of science in day-to-day, activities of the society, but also on the impact of science in general to the challenges that society is facing, I think you are more likely to incentivize national governments and politicians to invest in science because there is a societal value to that. So that speaks to the value of science in society. So that's also something that is very important to highlight. And I think the other question, if I got it right about the industry involvement, I think one of the things that is often been suggested, I think, to involve industry, particularly be it in curriculum design and research that the universities are engaged in.
Thank you, moderator. I think I'll handle I'll skip the Carnegie Mellon University. By the way, I also am a visiting professor at the University of Rwanda, and we work with CMU mostly, and I'm happy to acknowledge that presence. From AIMS, how to convince African governments to invest in STI. I'm speaking from government perspective. I'm a policymaker. I am the director responsible for this. And I wanted just to share with you just one aspect in that regard. Take, for instance, the past 3-4 days or 7 days, we've been celebrating 3 critical key events. Number one was, the World International Day for Creativity and Innovation. And this has been celebrated. Around that, in my country, for example, the U.S. Embassy, hosted that. And some of the critical key statistics which came out from there is that the creative industry, for example, in my country, in terms of its contribution to GDP, as observed by the World Intellectual Property Organization, has been hovering from 3.3 to 3.6, and it's increasing. When I'm saying contribution to GDP, it means this creative, arts sector, which is within science, technology, and innovation policy frameworks, is contributing even much more than the traditional and conventional sectors of government, for example, maybe agriculture or others. Africa, globally, the contribution for creative industry is at 7%, but Africa has the highest potential, including the exploitation of endogenous or indigenous knowledge systems, where we have seen, for example, exploitation of medicinal and herbal-related aspects, transforming that to the pharmaceuticals, and we are monitoring that at the African Standards Organization, but also member states. If we can demonstrate to governments how using science bioactive compounds, phytochemical analysis of the herbs which we have, huge, indigenous knowledge within Africa, that we invest in that one, we transform them in the labs, produce drugs and vaccines, combat to issues which we have seen, for example, COVID. Pfizer is exploiting the same. US, South Africa, Namibia are exploiting these kind of things. This is exactly what the government wants. I just wanted to highlight on that one. And this should be enshrined in the national science, technology, and innovation policies. The question to give platform to young, how can we give a platform to young people? I wanted to give an example of curriculum. In our country right now, we are changing the curriculum from preschool, primary, secondary, colleges, even the universities. So in that pathway, just last week we have the National Education Conference on curriculum change and innovation. So that was the theme, and I was one of the keynote speakers. In there, we insist to see that from preschool, we are already situating, how, we are capturing the young ones. But also in the policy formulation process, the young people are given chance to create what they want to see for the next decades through that policy. So this is also what we're trying to do. Lastly, how do we bring industry? Through funding from the USAID, transforming education systems, TASE, World Bank, and several others, critical for member states, which we are seeing happening in most of the African countries, is to create what never used to be there. University, industry linkages, framework. Which will be practical to see that there is a pathway, continuous pathways of this. And the practical formulation of that, for example, in the case of Malawi, is through university innovation pods. So an UN pod has been created with funding from UNDP and others, and we are seeing now the industry and the universities meet in that place for rapid prototyping, but also precision manufacturing of things and projects formulating depending on the needs that we want to be solved. And this also applies to digital skills for girls. Malawi girls can code, learning from the African Union and supported by the other embassies like the Irish embassy to just show how you can have a mix of industry, young people, I'm talking of girls from 14 to 25, coding in everything else, and begin to drive robots and all these kind of things. This is the kind of thing that we're looking at, and these will be used for any other sector, the 13 service sectors and others. I just wanted to share these ones. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I would like to echo his statement, actually. I don't think there is any government, good or bad, would like to fail. And if we can prove to the government that we are able to deliver and support its endeavor to improve the economy, to solve the problems, the challenges they face, I think they will spend on science. I mean, it's like that. This will bring us to another point, how we choose our research focus or areas. The assessment methods of excellence, promotion on the continent should be changed, should have a look into this. When we solely depend on matrices, I have published this number of paper, I have got this high impact factor. And where is the assessment of the impact, the social aspect of this research on the community? If we can increase and showcase of the impact of our research, definitely we will get funded. I have been through different conversation with people in the government in country back in Egypt. They say, why should we invest in this? Do we have enough money to spend on doing this fancy research? Prove to us that this will bring us revenue. So if we can prove this to the government, definitely they will be keen to support our research. Getting the industry on board, we need, again, to showcase there is a deep trust issues between researchers, I think, on the continent, different countries, not only in my country, but I think it's widely on the continent, and industry. They seek profit. when they don't want to lose money, they don't want to lose time, because time at the end of the day will be interpreted for them as money. If we prove case that we can solve their problem, definitely they will cooperate with us. So I think we have a lot to do to be convincing for different parties to get on board.
I'll have the last few words before I hand over to our chair. You know, we have to create the science pipeline. So I'm first going to respond to the comment on the youth and also building the female leadership we need. And, you know, if I look at world leadership at the moment, there's a conspicuous absence of women. And we do know history, who starts wars. And this is a time for peace. And this is a time for people to get together and to build that next generation. So it's a pipeline. It's building from the bottom and pushing down to help and pull up from the top. So one example is with the African Academy of Science, we are focusing now on the diaspora to link them back into this continent so that they can give back and they can help generate those 100,000 PhDs we need to train in the next 10 years. And specifically to invest in young people, young scientists, to lure them into science and keep them in science, because we know that pipeline is leaking all the time. And putting strategies together that we not only train our young next generation leaders and brilliant scientists and grow our science base, but that we retain them in that system and that we have the female professors of the future. Getting government and industry involved. I just think we don't need to prove to government that they need scientists. I think COVID clearly showed that scientists can and will and must make the difference in the future. There was a very good book written about Stand Up for Science, and that's a book that I think every scientist must read. But we can go forward together. To get industry on board is another discussion. I think our time is running out. But I think it's important that we sit together and we create a space where we can talk about our future together.
Thank you very much. Those are some really interesting points there, which I think we must pick up again. But let's just have another round. Hand up there, 3 hands up there. So let's just have those and then we'll come back.
Thank you very much. My name is Linley Chuona Carlton, and I'm from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences in Sweden. But I happen to be here because I collaborate with the University of Rwanda through the Swedish bilateral capacity building programs, where we train postgraduate students to PhD level so they can be, that we can contribute towards that 1,000 PhD scholars, or 100,000 that is being mentioned. So I just wanted to latch on to the points that the introduction you made of Kwame Nkrumah and the African Union. And in particular, I'm glad that, Lisa, you brought up the issue of the African diaspora. I happen to be one of those in the diaspora working in the academic space. So the African Union, some years ago, did say that the African diaspora was the 6th region of the African continent. And apparently, I'm not sure if that's been ratified yet, so I stand to be corrected. If some of you know, I'm not sure if that's been ratified. So where are we in terms of ratifying that the African diaspora is the 6th region? 1. Mm-hmm. 2, just to push you a little bit further, Lisa. Mm-hmm. So we've had a couple of initiatives whereby the African diaspora has been through the Carnegie Foundation. There was this huge diaspora thing, go back and teach and come back. And then some others have tried that, and it has also kind of like been a stopgap. And now here we're coming up with this 100,000, and I believe it's the European Union through the Arua initiative. So how are we going to do this so that, 1, it's sustainable? The World University News came up with a very interesting debate article. If some of you haven't seen it, I would really recommend that you look at it. And it says, It is time for the African continent to stop looking at Africans in the diaspora merely as a source of remittances, but that they can contribute and do a new way of academic, education and excellence. And I just came from another session where it says, it's not about excellence, but it's more about quality. So I'm asking you all here, how? How can we do this so that it's not just a stopgap measure? And how can we make it easier? It's actually easier for somebody who is like this gentleman from Portugal to come here with Carnegie Mellon and to be based here and to be running a university and a component of academic excellence here than it is for me to go to Malawi, being of Malawian origin, and start up something. It is infinitely 200 times more difficult. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Connie Shemreire. I'm from Uganda, and I also am the director of the Africa Science Leadership Program at the University of Pretoria, Future Africa. And I have some not fully formed thoughts, but I'm compelled to share them. And I just want to trace what brought us all here this afternoon, which is that there was no proposal from Africa to host an ISC center, hub, something like this. And why was that? Because, well, the interpretation of that was that maybe there's no interest in the African STI people in contributing to global science policy. Why? Because we are too fragmented. Why? No, we stop the why there, and then we say, okay, we should all come together. And my challenge to us is that we should really continue to ask further whys. Why are we fragmented? Could it be that, because I think we arrive at solutions too quickly, which is why maybe that's why some solutions don't work. Why are we fragmented? Could it be that many of the entities in this landscape have different agendas? Why? Is it that many of these agendas are externally or, not really agendas that emerge from us? Why? Like, we really need to get to the bottom of the why. Otherwise, I'm afraid anything that we arrange or organize will be solving the wrong problem. But one thing that I really, and then just to comment on the issue of how can we convince governments, how can we become more relevant, et cetera, as science. I think of the music industry in Uganda, music and cinema and film. These are industries that they've struggled all through my life. They've struggled and struggled. No one takes them seriously. No one funds them. But of late, they've really rallied together and become more relevant and now, have global presence. We, as scientists, really have to rethink the way that we do things. I'm sorry to say that maybe creating more fora, and I think we are reflective on that. I can see in the panel that we think, okay, maybe it shouldn't be another formal organization. It shouldn't be this. It shouldn't be that. So we are reflecting on it. My question to us is, maybe we need to really ask more whys until we get to more of the root of the problem. But just to conclude what I'm saying, I'm really glad that at least in the title of the proposed forum is the word leadership, because I think many scientists lack the courage sometimes to break away. Even when we talk about why do we continue to decide promotion based on papers, no scientist, no vice chancellor, no head of department, well, not none, but very few, have had the courage to break away from some of the things that we know clearly do not work for us. So I must commend us, at least for including the word leadership in this proposal. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Olusegun Michael Ogundele by name from the Nigerian Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. which is more like the Nigerian IP-based national platform. And what we do with the Nigerian IP-based national platform is to coordinate the national functions of IP-based at the national level. Well, interestingly, INGSA2024 conference is holding at a very material point in time when world governments just finished the negotiation on the International Plastic Treaty. And across all the world, we definitely agree that the three global crises now, environmentally wise, is pollution, climate change, and biodiversity loss. And these three issues is cutting across every part of our daily activities, either we like it or not. There is no part of our activities that we definitely break away from these three global issues. At the level of the biodiversity loss, we are just having a new global treaty called the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which serves just like a biodiversity version to the UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. And now, world government is also coming up with another global treaty on plastic pollution. Now, my concern is, how do we begin to scope, how do we begin to contextualize government science advice in these global policy-making decision processes? And as Africans, it's definitely obvious we always be at the receiver end. As a person, I was very practically involved in the processes that led to the adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And what happened at the negotiation floor is something else. You see a lot of proposals for the global treaty from other countries, the UK government, the European government, the Asian government, being the fact that the process is being governed by the Chinese government. Then we also have, on another part, some form of proposals, to be included in that global biodiversity treaty. Well, interestingly, the African government also, in one way or the other, also organized in the African group of negotiators. Then the question, or my concern throughout the whole process of this negotiation process is, how has the government representatives in these global negotiation processes being represented by the African group of negotiators been able to use evidence-based science, or be able to apply the government science advice techniques or processes, in instituting or in presenting the interest of Africans, the interest of African countries in this global policy framework. Either we like it or not, the three global crises we're talking about now, Africans definitely, are the main, suffer the consequences, either climate change issues, biodiversity-wise, or plastic pollutions. The resources are down here in Africa. The markets are down here in Africa. And the developed countries look down to Africa to situate their market, use the resources, then question of sustainability, question of government science advice, then the questions of the environmental framework being put into practice, is of utmost concern. My question, finally, how do we situate government science advice or legislative science processes, in these global negotiation processes for these global treaties? Because without we contextualizing these scopes, as Africans, presenting our interest in these global frameworks, I don't think our interests will definitely be contained in whatsoever framework or agenda of these international treaties we'll be talking about as government science and legislative science advices. Thank you so much.
No, I think that, thank you very much. Thank you for three really interesting questions. I mean, the question about the diaspora is a critical one, it seems to me. And I think there's a lot to learn from what's happening with Asian countries and the way that they are sort of stepping in and also you're seeing the reaction like of the US, for example, to that kind of influence. I mean, so I think I think that that's a really critical question, and this idea of thinking about Africa as being much bigger than just, the continent itself, the physical continent, I think is a very important point, I think. And I want to just go back to your point. I mean, I think there's a critical point here, and it takes me to the issue of the nature of science, because in a sense, when our governments are negotiating these big, whether it's the climate change kind of targets and so on, who are they representing, right? I mean, just, so clearly they are elected, they represent our people, but, as Lisa will kind of tell you, the challenges of climate change are going to be felt by ordinary people, right? So, what is the role then of science, of being an interlocutor, if you like, between these different levels of social organization, kind of communities, provincial, national governments, and then these big global conversations. So it seems to me that it's not just simply about advising governments. It's about saying that there's a whole continuum of levels here that have to be engaged in. So it takes you back to this idea of just asking, what is the nature of science? What's the relationship between science and society? So I think it's a very critical point. And I think that the issue around leadership is a critical one, because I think that it does raise this very big issue of how do we ensure that leadership is kind of empowered, if you like, to have this influence. But I think what we're also coming to grips with is this idea that leadership has to be diverse, that it has to kind of really go beyond, like, the old boys clubs, like, and that it's not just about women and men, it's about youth, and it's generational, but it's also about leadership at different kind of scales of society, if you like, civic organizations, industry, and so on, being at the table around science, it seems to me. So, yeah, but I'm going to hand over.
Thank you very much. I want to add to that, there's a certain context of demystifying science. And I think during COVID, it was interesting because I think the scientists got as much airtime as some of the presidents. And it was interesting to me because when I was reading Prof. Karim's book, and I just loved it, and I always say to everyone, you have to read the book, because that's a family of scientists, and they grow up talking about science and how each and everyone in that family got involved in science, be it from a legal point of view or a policy point of view, or actually working in the laboratories and making a huge impact. So there's stories to be told, and I think we need to tell these stories because we also need role models. So for our young generation to pull them in to become leaders of the world, in the science world, they need to see success, and they need to see scientists can make an impact. I want to just go back to a very important comment on the diaspora, because that's close to heart, and I think I call it the age tipping point. Once you reach 60, your mindset change. Well, that's at least my experience. Where previously I was really focused on building my career. And once I hit the 60, I realized I can't build anymore. I now have to give back. And that's your next phase in your life around satisfaction. There's a reward in it. And there's a sense of belonging, going back to your community and giving back. That doesn't mean you need to be exploited. So I'm also looking at what do we do with retired professors. And you know what? We often bring them in to still co-supervise students, but we pay them less than what we would pay a postdoc. So most universities, I believe, abuse them. So we need to get a viable financial system that will lure retired people back into the system to help train these next generation and the diaspora. So to answer the comment on what and how, what Arise has done is we have invested in young scientists and asking them to set the agenda. put forward proposals of research they want and their network. And now we're going into a RISE 2, we're going to get funding to create centers of excellence. And it's very similar to the Arua Centers of Excellence initiative from the World Bank. And there we want to link the diaspora so that there's a financial benefit and they are co-PIs on the project with one of the next young generation mentors. And that's our strategy going forward.
So it was very interesting comments. Diaspora. Definitely, it's an asset for the continent. Those minds are African minds, and definitely they have loyalty for the continent, and they would like to support. They need to find out a platform that facilitates their engagement, and the way that they won't say coming back, but doing something good for the continent. For sure, they will be keen to do this. In Egypt, we have developed different types of mechanisms to try to link people outside with scientists inside, having common proposals. We have a program, for example, from the Science, Technology and Innovation Agency in Egypt called Bridges. For this, you have to get the proposal accepted if developed between an Egyptian diaspora working with one of the scientific groups inside Egypt. When we developed big national projects, we call for our diaspora who are specialists on this area. For example, the Egyptian Genome Project, I am one of the scientific committee. We were keen to have specialists in the different genome research to be sitting on board with us. It is added value, and if this vision is clear, I think it will be easy to find out ways to get benefit of the diaspora and to employ them to serve their countries and definitely by consequence serving the continent. Leadership. This, I think, one of the things, many of the gaps we are talking about in the continent, we can go back to, I don't want to be harsh, but lacking the competent leadership on the continent. And for this, we need to develop capacity building programs, starting with young researchers like the ASLP, the African Science Leadership Program, whom I'm proud to be one of the fellows. But this is not enough. The continent is large, and we need to develop this capacity on national level, regional level, and this will solve many of these problems we are talking about. So leadership is a key issue. If we have skillful leaders who have vision, it will be easy that they sit together, put the strategy, define common goals. Such forum we are calling for will be much easier to operate if you have skillful leadership sitting on. I think I covered all of the stuff.
Thank you. On the diaspora, I wanted to say that national development blueprints, beyond the African Union, beyond the citations which we see in the scholarly articles and journals citing the 60th region across the whole globe, which we see, and it's an endorsed region. National development blueprints, development agenda for member states must articulate deliberately their positioning in terms of diaspora. Our own Malawi government national development blueprint has 237 pages. On page 69, it says establish a national, a diaspora network, and to be overseen and regulated by the Foreign Affairs. And this is already, so we see all the sectors engaging the diaspora network to be useful. And we have seen our own president appoint a board, a chief operating officer for Liquid Telecom in UK, where an African, Steve Masiyiwa, is putting up all the network. Here in Rwanda, you have Liquid Telecom, massive, huge networks. The COO is a Malawian, has been appointed as diaspora to sit as a technical advisor in IT for the president of Malawi, tapping into Google, Microsoft, and everything else. And I normally have a lot of engagements with him through that simple thing, and we are tapping huge resources. And that's why you see Malawi, in terms of the digital transformation pathways, frameworks, and everything, at least we are benchmarking in real time on every day what's happening globally from the diaspora, feeding in there. And I just wanted to say that in terms of dropping down the ball to industrialize ourselves, we need to be deliberate. I've just produced this book where I'm saying springboard, because we are not going to play catch up anymore in Africa. If you choose to do so, you can do so, but for us, we don't want to play catch up. We'll have to leapfrog. And to do that, we need to be deliberate. In this one, it's a springboard for industrialization through science, technology, and innovation in Malawian schools. We are putting up small, deliberate, mean factories, plants within a primary school, and let they play about. Let them produce, let them mine, let them do X, Y, Z, including mining of rutile. The whole plant process should be understood from there. And then you find that deliberately we are culturing the culture, the scientific culture, the industrialization culture will be from that. And the curriculum should also be deliberate, and the extracurricular. So I just wanted to share this thing because we don't have much time, but just to mention that I think we need to have that leadership, we need to be deliberate, we need to expose. In our context, when I'm talking about this book, I'm talking of it being made available to 5.3 million primary school learners, 485,000 secondary school learners, and over 6 million learners to go through such kind of things. And that counts for 33 to 35% of the population of the country. And that is 79 to 80% of the youth based on the African Charter from 0 to 35 years of age. We need to be targeting those ones deliberately. Thank you. I wanted to submit that.
Thank you. Sorry, I'll just respond to one question related to the diaspora. I just received a text message that we should be wrapping up, so we'll try to do that. So just to share with you, I think on the diaspora, I don't know if you're aware about some of the work that UNECA and the International Labour Organization is doing. So they just held a side event during the South Africa Science Forum. I think they have also had other engagements over the past year. And one of the things that they're doing, they're developing a database of the scientists in the diaspora so they can easily be accessible to different stakeholders within the science ecosystem in Africa to be able to engage with them and request for support for that. And I think just to build on one of the ARISE program, there are similar models on the continent. For example, we, at the University of Pretoria, we had a UKRI grant in which we linked early career researchers to researchers in the diaspora as mentors, together with mentors on the African continent, so that in addition to utilizing the skills and the support of the diaspora, we also are building institutional capacity within the continent and at our institutions in Africa. So with that, I'll just end there.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to just thank the panel. Unfortunately, we missed out on having our colleague from who's in Zimbabwe, and I'm just trying to find Saruzai Munyambo. Unfortunately, didn't join us, but it would have been good to have her on the panel as well, especially as she's working with young women scientists. But just to say, I'd like to for you to join me to thank the panel. I think it was an interesting session. I think it's. I don't think it's helped the ISC or Future Africa to solve the problem. It just raised a whole range of questions with some kind of indications of what we should be focusing on. But thank you very much to the audience as well, and for your participation and for your patience and so on. I know we started a little late, but thank you again, and hope the rest of the 2 days goes well. Thank you very much.